Welcome back to Mzansi Welcomes the World. Now, as G20 leaders gather, the newly released report of the Extraordinary Committee of Independent Experts on the Global Inequality has once again placed a spotlight on persistent gender disparities, revealing that women, particularly in developing nations, continue to bear the brunt of economic and social equality. And none more so than we see right here in South Africa. So joining me to take this conversation forward, I'd like to welcome Mpiwa Mangwiro-Tsanga, who is from Sonke Gender Justice. Of course, they're an organization that works towards the emancipation of women's rights within the country. Mpiwa, absolute pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for joining us here on Mzansi Welcomes the World on Hilaal TV.
Thank you so much for having me, and it's a pleasure to be here.
No, absolute pleasure to have you on. Mpiwa, I want to start off with that report of the Extraordinary Committee on Global Inequality.
Yes.
Again, it just highlights the inequality women face, especially within the Global South. What was Sonke Gender Justice's initial reaction to that report that was released?
As you have highlighted, that report really clearly shows that inequality is not neutral. Inequality is gendered. It is not gender neutral. It is very much gendered, with women often at the receiving end. Women are at the margins of the economy. Women are the ones who are often marginalized, who are often excluded from access to wealth, from access to economic opportunities. They are the ones who bear the brunt of unpaid care work. So certainly that report aligns with what we see as being the realities, the day-to-day realities of many women in the Global South.
Mpiwa, between 2000 and 2024, wealth inequality intensified. But the interesting part of this is that many of the wealthy, many of those who are now not just taking in billions, but are within the trillions, are that of male. And women's share of global wealth remains disproportionately small. Stats are there for everyone to see. What do you think within the international frameworks, even those within the G20, has failed to close this gap? Because when we saw what happened last year in Brazil's G20 summit, it was quite clear that within the next year, something has to be done with regards to this.
Yes, I think, you know, the one thing is often policies focus on growth. When we're talking about wealth, we're talking about development, it's always focusing around growth, but never really ask the questions of who is benefiting from this growth.
Sure.
And as I have highlighted, you then find that when policies do not address issues such as unpaid care work, such as the gender pay gap,
Yes.
so that continues to widen. So while we have policies that will continue to celebrate and demonstrate that economies are growing, these are not gender sensitive frameworks. And because these frameworks are not gender sensitive, they are not taking into consideration some of the structural barriers and some of the structural challenges and limitations that women often face. And in the process, as you are saying, those who have even grown into the billions continue to be
Or trillions, actually.
or trillions even.
Yeah.
We are seeing that they are predominantly male because there is a certain embedded patriarchal privilege that has positioned men in certain ways that they are able to access opportunities, they're able to access wealth more better than female counterparts. And policies, unfortunately, and international frameworks have not been able to close that gap. Also because of lack of political will. In many instances, there is lack of political will by many estates to really fund policies and frameworks that seek to address inequality, particularly from a gender perspective. So you find that in some instances, we have the frameworks.
Sure.
The frameworks are not costed. The frameworks are not resourced. The frameworks are not being properly implemented, and there is poor or minimal accountability in terms of how these policies and how these frameworks are really being implemented. So where there is no accountability, there's a high likelihood that the policies are not going to be effectively implemented, resulting in what we are seeing, that gender inequality continues to be more entrenched year in, year out.
Mpiwa, South Africa hosts the G20. The unique opportunity that South Africa finds itself in is that we're the first African country to host it. We don't know if we're going to be the last. But when we look at the challenges South African women face, especially African women within South Africa, high gender-based violence. The economy closes down, especially that of black African women. This is a unique opportunity, isn't it, for South Africa? You speak of political will. Well, if there's not a better time to do it than now, then we'll never have that opportunity.
Yes, certainly. This is a unique opportunity for South Africa and also for the African continent, because this G20 presidency gives South Africa and the continent an opportunity to recenter the global agenda in terms of what should be prioritized. It gives an opportunity to really address some of those historical injustices, structural injustices, the colonial history and what it is, the impact that it has had, the issues around access to land, the issues around even resources within the continent are being partitioned and utilized to benefit the rest of the world, much to the disadvantage of the continent. It also gives the opportunity to address some of those structural barriers that are limiting women from being able to meaningfully participate in the economies of the world, to meaningfully have access to resources and access to wealth and opportunities. And it gives an opportunity to really call for a meaningful transformation going forward, that some of the policies that have to be put in place are policies that really should be meaningfully tackling the inequality and the challenges that we are experiencing in the world, and also on the continent, and mainly particularly for the global south as well.
And another thing, Mpiwa, that's quite interesting is that within this report, race, class, geography, all of that comes into perspective. So we see what's happening in Sudan right now with the civil war, and the experiences of a woman in Sudan, whether it's in Darfur, Al-Fasher, or Khartoum, will have a different experience to that of a woman staying in a high-rise building in a rich suburb in Manhattan, New York. And then again is where this policy platform allows for the discussion to happen. But the question remains, are we going to move from discussion to actual action? In the view of Sonke Gender Justice, do you see that happening?
I think, like what you have said, the first thing is intersectionality is very important, because we are not a homogeneous group. Even as women are not a homogeneous group. Like you have said, how a woman in Darfur is affected is by a policy. It's not going to be the same way that a woman in Manhattan is affected by a policy. How a woman living with disability is going to be affected by a policy is different from how a woman who's not living with disability. So intersectionality is the mechanism that enables us to ensure that we are not being blind. We are not applying policies that are neutral and which are supposedly neutral, if I may say, and yet they further entrench inequality. And this explains how in some instances you find that a certain woman has been left behind while another one seemingly is in a somewhat seemingly better position, although I must say that generally we know that women are a marginalized group and we have to break through so many barriers. So intersectionality helps us to be mindful of some of those barriers, the different barriers that women encounter and how they intersect in their lives. And certainly there is a need to come up with policies that address that. And I think those are some of the things that we in the different processes of the G20, the C20, that should be called for, to say we are calling for policies that are not neutral or blind to the intersectionalities that converge amongst different women of different groups, different ages, different socioeconomic backgrounds, races, and identity. So I think it's important that that is taken, that the G20 is mindful of that in whatever policies that they are going to commit to and seek to implement.
Well, after the break, I continue my conversation with Mpiwa Mangwiro-Tsanga, and we're going to be speaking on the feminization of poverty. How do we get to gender-just economy? And it's quite clear, especially within the Global South, we are not seeing that happening anytime soon. None more so right here in South Africa. Do stay tuned. We'll be back after this break. Welcome back to Mzansi Welcomes the World. I'm still in conversation with Mpiwa Mangwiro-Tsanga from Sonke Gender Justice. Mpiwa, the feminization of poverty continues to rise, and again, especially here in Africa and the Global South. What solutions would Sonke Gender Justice be willing to put to the table if approached to allow for there to be gender-just economy?
Okay. So I think feminization of poverty, firstly, it means that more women are living on the margins. Less pay, less access to resources, less access to land, the burden of unpaid care work is on them, and a lot of structural barriers have been placed on women, and they become the face of poverty because of those limitations that have been put. And I think that if we are to meaningfully address that, then there needs to be solid legal frameworks that seek to address these structural barriers. There is need for the recognition of care work and its integration into the economy. There is need for laws and policies that ensure that women are able to also have access to resources, access to land, and are also able to meaningfully participate in the economy. There is also need to really meaningfully address some of the structural barriers that women are facing, and also ensuring that mechanisms that are being put in place to address the limitations that women are facing are well resourced, and they are made easily accessible to women, and they are also there is accountability for the implementation of such mechanisms, because it does not help to just come and say we are going to put a policy in place when that policy is not followed by is not backed by the necessary tools and the necessary means to ensure that it is practically applied and can be, its impact can be felt by a woman who's on the ground. So we need the G20 to put clear targets that they are setting and putting in place, to say we are going to put clear targets in place, to say these are the targets, these are the policies that we're going to put, these are the resources that we're going to put, these are the targets that we're saying each year we need to move from point A to point B for us to be able to meaningfully tackle this challenge.
Mpiwa, the other challenge that women face is the seat at the table, or even owning the table. And I'm talking about boardrooms and politics. And this is the challenge I feel the G20 nations need to address quite urgently. How critical is it that women's participation in especially policy making is tabled for genuine transformation? So in South Africa, you can have the BBBEE, you can have all these wonderful legislations which allow for this transformation. But if we're not seeing it, and this goes both the public and the private sector, then those pieces of paper become just that, a piece of paper.
Certainly. Yes, certainly. I think, like you have said, women's participation in decision-making spaces is critical. It is a must. It's not. It's not supposed to be an optional issue, because the issue is that they bring in they bring lived realities to the decision-making space, and they're able to bring the lived realities of what women are experiencing, which is a voice that when women are excluded is missing, and we end up having decisions and policies that are devoid of the experiences of women, that are devoid of the realities of women. And here we're not just talking about tick-the-box kind of representation. Sure. We are talking about meaningful participation. We are talking about women's participation in decision-making spaces that are conducive for them to participate, that are conducive for them to be able to make a contribution and to also share of their experiences, bring their voice and the agency of the women that they represent. So it is actually a very critical thing that we have women in decision-making spaces, because that we know that when women are in decision-making spaces, then issues that affect women, issues of social reform, issues are likely to be put on the table. Issues of access to resources for marginalized groups, including women, are likely to be put to the table. Issues of meaningfully tackling challenges such as gender-based violence are likely to be put on the table. So universal social protection mechanisms are likely to be put on the table when we have more women represented, and also bringing in the realities of a constituency that is often marginalized and excluded.
Mpiwa, another challenge that many women face is that of labor. It's unpaid, whether it's from domestic care or community work. In your view, how could the G20 framework better recognize and value this work, particularly when we talk about post-pandemic recovery and sustainable goals? I think both you and I know women face tons of challenges when it came to the pandemic.
Yes.
Whether it was gender-based violence or sectors of the economy. Where do you feel this needs to be addressed?
I think the burden of care work is something that certainly needs to be addressed urgently, because women's efforts, women's contribution is going unrecognized and unremunerated. So it is time that the G20 recognizes care work. It should be recognized as work, and also it should be funded. There is also a need to fund care work and care responsibilities, you know, such as child care, preschools, elderly care, and so forth. This needs to be fully funded, and this needs to be fully remunerated, so that the burden that is often placed on women is alleviated. And yeah, so I would say that it's about time that the burden of unpaid care work is recognized, and care work is recognized as a form of work, and there is adequate funding that is placed on care services, so that women do not continue to bear the brunt.
One final question, Mpiwa. Commitments are made under the G20 engagement groups, such as, of course, W20, which is Women 20, and we hope to, of course, get them on our show ahead of the Leaders Summit. But implementations lag behind. Sometimes it's not even recognized. In the view of Sonke Gender Justice, what accountability mechanisms should be put in place to ensure gender equality commitments are not just symbolic, but are actionable?
I think it's about time that the G20 commits to very clear time-bound targets, that they will even be able to say, by this period of time, this is how much what we seek to achieve in alleviating the burden of care work. There should be a clear commitment of resources that are put in place. We have been calling under the C20 in the working group on women and gender equality on the C20. One of the things we're calling for is that the G20 commits 1% of their GDP to addressing issues of gender equality.
This is besides the 1% tax. I know organizations like Oxfam have been calling for a 1 to 2% tax on the super wealthy. So one of the recommendations is 1% of the G20 GDP to addressing this right over here that you're mentioning.
1% of the G20 GDP should be channeled towards addressing gender equality issues and ensuring that mechanisms are well financed and ensuring that if it's committing to addressing gender-based violence, ensuring that there are survivor-centered approaches, ensuring that these are well financed, ensuring that when we are talking of access to resources, policies are put in place to ensure that climate financing, for instance, is gendered, and you take into consideration that. So we want clear targets that are time-bound. We want transparency and accountability, because that's one of the issues that's been a challenge, that often there is no accountability, and we are calling for accountability. We are calling for transparency. We are calling for gender disaggregated data that is shared to demonstrate and see how much progress is being made and in terms of the commitments that G20 is making. So those are some of the things that we are calling for, and we are saying the G20 member states should, it's about time that they make meaningful commitments that are clear, commitments that have targets that are measurable, and there is also that there is a clear reporting mechanism through which we can be able to monitor and be able to hold them accountable to see how much progress they are making and if they are living up to their commitments.
Mpiwa Mangwiro-Tsanga, absolute pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for joining us here on Mzansi Welcomes the World.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
That's Mpiwa Mangwiro-Tsanga. She is from Sonke Gender Justice. Well, that's all we have for you here on Mzansi Welcomes the World. We will see you again on Saturday between 3:30 to 4:30. From myself, for Hospital, and the rest of the team in Johannesburg, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.